As the chief investment officer of Meridian Capital Partners, one of Bay Street's most formidable wealth management firms, Constance Aldridge had built her entire reputation on one thing: never losing control. She had navigated the 2008 financial collapse from a glass-walled office on the 32nd floor of a Toronto tower, her voice steady on phone calls while billion-dollar portfolios hemorrhaged overnight. She had sat across from men twice her age and half her competence and made them flinch first. She had rebuilt her firm from 42 million in managed assets to just under 3 billion in 11 years, without a single scandal, without a single public tremor. And then her 4-year-old daughter stopped talking, just like that, 6 months ago. One morning, Willa had been chattering about a robin she'd seen on the back fence, its orange chest like a traffic cone, she'd said, which had made Constance laugh so hard her coffee went cold. And then somewhere between that morning and the next, the words stopped coming. Not a stutter, not a slowdown, a wall. The pediatric specialists called it selective mutism, triggered by acute anxiety. The therapists called it her daughter's way of protecting herself. Constance called it the one thing in her life she had absolutely no idea how to fix. The gala at the Fairmont Royal York had been circled on her calendar for 4 months. The Northern Lights Children's Foundation annual fundraiser. Meridian was the title sponsor, which meant Constance wasn't just attending, she was the face of the entire evening. 300 guests, media, a live auction she was expected to open with remarks. There was no version of this night where she didn't show up, composed and polished and holding it together. Her nanny had canceled that afternoon, a family emergency, genuine and irreversible. Constance had burned through her backup list in 23 minutes, 3 voicemails, 2 out of town, 1 who picked up but whose own child had a fever. There was no one. She had sat in her kitchen on King West looking at Willa, who was sitting cross-legged on the tile floor, pressing a small wooden rabbit against her cheek, the way she did when she was working something out internally, and Constance had made the decision that she would regret and not regret for the rest of her life. She brought Willa with her. She told herself it would be fine. Willa was used to quiet spaces, galleries, libraries, her mother's office after hours. She'd been to smaller events before, sat behind the scenes without incident. Constance arranged for a quiet anteroom off the main ballroom, packed a bag with Willa's rabbit and her sketch pad, and the small pair of noise-canceling headphones that helped with crowd sounds. She'd checked the room herself at 4 in the afternoon, confirmed the door handle, confirmed the lock couldn't engage from the outside. She was thorough. She was always thorough. What she hadn't accounted for was the way 300 people arriving simultaneously, the surge of perfume and laughter, and the particular roar of a crowd in an echoing marble foyer would hit Willa like a physical thing. The anteroom was on the far side of the ballroom. They were halfway across the main floor when it happened. A tray of champagne glasses dropped somewhere behind them, the crash like a gunshot in the vaulted space, and Constance felt Willa's hand wrench out of hers. She spun around. Willa was not behind her. She was not to the left, not to the right. The crowd had moved and shifted in that single second, and her daughter was simply not there. The next 4 minutes were the worst of Constance's professional life, which was saying something. She moved through the crowd with controlled speed, calling Willa's name at a pitch just below panic. Not because she wasn't panicking, but because 30 years of boardroom discipline meant her terror had no external setting. She checked under the nearest table. She checked behind the floor-length velvet drapes on the east wall. She stopped a server and asked in a voice she barely recognized as her own, and the woman's face shifted in a way that made Constance's stomach drop. The hotel had been put on soft lockdown. The duty manager, to his credit, had moved immediately, doors secured, security at exits, staff alerted. Constance was standing in the middle of the ballroom with 300 people beginning to notice something was wrong, and her daughter was somewhere in this building, alone, in a space that was the exact opposite of everything that kept Willa safe. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely going to cry. What she did not know, and would only piece together later from a series of descriptions offered by increasingly emotional witnesses, was that Willa had not gone far. She had gone toward the quiet. There was a service corridor off the west side of the ballroom, past the catering station, that led to a loading bay used for deliveries. The hotel had hired a local contractor that week for emergency repairs to a freight elevator, a jammed cable, a deadline before the weekend gala crowd arrived. The contractor had been working since 6 that morning and had just finished. He was sitting on an overturned milk crate in the corridor, eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag, when a small girl in a yellow dress appeared around the corner and stopped, staring at him with the very particular expression of someone who is scared but more curious than scared. His name was Eamon Doyle. He was 38, wore a Carhartt jacket that had seen better years, and had the kind of hands that told you exactly what kind of work he did. Scarred at the knuckles, permanently stained at the cuticles with something that looked like grease, and probably was. He had a daughter of his own, 6 years old, who was currently with his mother in Brampton while he finished out this job. He had been a paramedic for 7 years before a back injury took him off active duty, and he'd retrained as a licensed elevator mechanic, which he was now also certified to do. He knew things about people in distress that most people didn't know they could learn. He did not get up. He did not reach toward her. He looked at the small girl in the yellow dress and he said, very quietly, the way you'd address someone on a ledge, "Hey, you look like you might be hiding from something loud." Willa did not answer. She never answered, but she did not leave. He took another bite of his sandwich. He chewed thoughtfully. He said, "I get it. Big rooms full of people are actually terrible. I don't know why adults think they're a good idea." There was a pause. Willa took one step closer. He held out his sandwich bag. "I've got an extra granola bar in here. I'm not going to eat it. It's just sitting there wasting its life." She didn't take it. But she sat down on the floor, approximately 3 feet from his milk crate, and pulled her wooden rabbit from wherever she'd been keeping it in the folds of her dress. He looked at the rabbit. He said, "Nice rabbit. What's his name?" Silence. "Fair enough," he said. "Names are private. I respect that." He reached into his tool bag, which was sitting open beside him, and produced a small brass-fitting, hexagonal, perfectly smooth on one face and threaded on the other. He held it out between 2 fingers. "You want to look at this? It's from the elevator, the busted part. I saved it because I thought my daughter might think it was interesting. She collects things, bolts, bottle caps, a bit of sea glass she found at Wasaga Beach 2 summers ago. She keeps them in an old tea tin." Willa looked at the fitting for a long moment. Then she held out her hand. He placed it in her palm. She turned it over. She pressed the smooth face against her cheek, just like she did with the rabbit, and Eamon Doyle looked at the ceiling and thought about his daughter, doing the exact same thing with a piece of sea glass, and felt something in his chest move. "My daughter has a thing with textures too," he said. "Smooth things. She can't sleep without a specific pillowcase. Has to be worn cotton, not new cotton. New cotton apparently feels wrong." He paused. "I washed it once with the wrong detergent and she knew immediately. Didn't say anything, just held it up and looked at me. I felt like I'd betrayed a treaty." This was the moment, Constance would later say, that she found them. She had been guided by a security guard, a young woman named Phoebe, who had found a small yellow shoe near the service corridor entrance and had the good sense to follow the direction it pointed. Constance came around the corner half prepared to find her daughter hiding alone under something, and instead found her sitting on a concrete floor next to a man in a work jacket, holding a piece of elevator hardware to her cheek, while he talked about laundry. Constance stopped. Her hand went to her sternum. The man looked up. He read her face in under a second, the fear resolving, the relief arriving, the particular collapse of a person who has been holding a very heavy thing and has just been allowed to put it down. He did not say anything dramatic. He said, "She found a quiet spot. She's been very good company." Constance's voice, when it came, was barely a voice. "Willa." Willa looked up at her mother. Then she looked at the man beside her. Then she looked back at the fitting in her hand. And then she held it up toward him and said, in a voice like something breaking open in the best possible way, His name is Button. The world stopped. Constance pressed her hand over her mouth. Phoebe, the security guard, made a sound she would later describe as not professional, sorry. Eamon Doyle looked at the small girl who had not spoken in his presence, who had given a piece of elevator hardware a name and offered it back to him like a gift. And he felt his throat close in the way it used to close on ambulance calls when someone who'd been unconscious opened their eyes. Button, he said. That's exactly right. I should have known that. Willa smiled. It was small and private. The smile of someone who had just confirmed a thing they already knew. The gala happened. Constance delivered her remarks somehow. She had washed her face in the hotel bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror and said, out loud to no one, "You are fine. She is fine. Go." The auction raised $400,000 for pediatric mental health services in Ontario, which felt, given the evening, like the universe having a word with her. She found Eamon Doyle again just before midnight. He had stayed. The duty manager had asked him to check the elevator one more time before the last guests cleared out, which was above his contractual obligation, but the kind of thing he apparently just did. He was in the lobby pulling on his jacket when Constance appeared beside him. She said, "I owe you more than I know how to express right now," he said. "You don't owe me anything. She was fine. She just needed somewhere quiet. She spoke to you." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, she did. She hasn't spoken in 6 months," Constance said, and her voice did the thing she had spent the whole evening preventing it from doing. Not to anyone, not since. She stopped. Her father died 14 months ago. It was sudden. She was there when the paramedics came. She looked at him. "You were a paramedic." Something moved across his face. "I was. 7 years. She felt safe with you." It wasn't an accusation. It was wonder. He looked at his jacket zipper for a moment. Sometimes kids just know who's going to be steady. Constance was quiet. Around them, the hotel lobby finished its evening. Cabs being called, goodbyes being said, the particular exhaustion of a successful event settling over the staff. She said finally, "Can I ask what you were hired to do here tonight?" Freight elevator. Cable had been slipping for a week. They needed it fixed before the weekend. She nodded slowly. Elevator mechanic. And before that, field paramedic. And before that, 3 years of mechanical engineering at Ryerson before I ran out of money and went the trade route instead. He said it without self-consciousness, the way someone describes a route they took that got them somewhere useful, regardless of the detours. Constance looked at him properly for the first time. He was about her age, maybe a year or two older. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that came from squinting at machinery in bad light, or possibly from laughing, or both. He was not what Bay Street looked like. He was something else entirely, something she had forgotten existed in the years she'd spent in towers looking down. She said, "Meridian Capital has a building on Adelaide, our head office. The elevator system is 22 years old, and we've been patching it for 3 years because the board keeps deferring the replacement cost." She paused. "We've had 2 near misses this year. I've been trying to force a tender call through since January." He was looking at her with an attention that was professional and then something more than professional. She said, "If I got the tender call through next week, would your company be able to bid?" He said, "I run my own operation. 3 certified mechanics, fully insured, WorkSafe BC." He stopped. "WorkSafe Ontario. Sorry. We've been doing a job in Vancouver that's had my brain half out west." He looked faintly embarrassed in a way she found unexpectedly disarming. "We've done 2 Bay Street buildings. The references are real," she said. "Send me a quote." He said, "I'd need to see the specs." She reached into her clutch. She was still in formal wear, heels, the whole architecture of the evening, and produced a business card. She held it out. He took it. He looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you're not sure is real. Then he found a receipt in his jacket pocket and wrote his number on the back and handed it to her. It was a Canadian Tire receipt. He noticed her notice it and said, "Drill bits," which made her laugh out loud. A real laugh, not a gala laugh. The kind of laugh she hadn't heard herself make in a long time. She went home that night and sat on the edge of Willa's bed and watched her daughter sleep. Willa had the brass fitting, Button. In her hand still, her fingers loosely curled around it. Her rabbit was tucked beside her pillow. Her face in sleep was the face of someone who had set something down. Constance stayed there longer than was practical. She thought about the way Willa had said that word. His name is Button, with the absolute authority of someone who has simply known something all along and waited for the right moment to say it. She thought about a man who'd sat on a concrete floor instead of standing over a frightened child. She thought about the elevator in her office building, which was genuinely dangerous and which she would now, finally, be able to fix. She thought about how the impossible thing she had been waiting 6 months for had happened in a hotel service corridor between a man eating a sandwich and her daughter clutching a wooden rabbit. She called the board chair at 7:30 the next morning and said, in her voice that did not invite discussion, that the elevator tender was going out that afternoon and she would be selecting the contractor personally, and that was the end of it. The board chair, who had known Constance for 9 years, said of course without pausing. Eamon Doyle submitted a quote 4 days later. It was detailed, precise, and $30,000 under the next lowest bid. She reviewed it herself, which she didn't need to do but did, and found exactly one thing to push back on, a materials specification she thought could be improved, and called him directly to discuss it. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. 38 of those minutes were about elevator systems, building codes, and a specific type of cable housing developed in Germany that was now becoming standard in Toronto's commercial sector. 2 of those minutes were about his daughter, whose name was Sorcha, and who had in fact found the brass fitting. Button, fascinating when he'd shown her a photograph of it. He got the contract. He started on site the 3rd week of November, which meant Constance saw him occasionally in the lobby of her building. She arrived early and left late, and he and his crew started at 7. She did not make a point of seeking him out. She also did not make a point of taking the stairs. Willa continued to work with her therapist. The speaking did not come flooding back all at once. That was not how it worked, the therapist was careful to explain, and Constance had to sit with that patience the way she sat with a market correction, understanding the logic while wanting it to resolve faster. But Willa started drawing things she then pointed to. She started making sounds that preceded words. She started, 2 weeks after the gala, asking for a glass of water at breakfast with 4 words said quietly into her cereal bowl, and Constance had said, "Of course, sweetheart," in the most normal voice she could manage, and then stood with her back to the kitchen, hands gripping the counter, until she could trust her face again. She told Amon about it when she saw him in the lobby one morning. She hadn't planned to. She was walking past the temporary construction barrier, and he was reviewing something on a clipboard, and she stopped and said, "She asked for water this morning." Out loud. He looked up. He understood immediately what that meant. He said, "Yeah," Constance said. 4 words. He smiled, and it rearranged his whole face. "That's everything," he said. She stood there in her coat and her heels and her 3rd coffee of the morning and thought that it was. It was, in fact, everything. The elevator project wrapped in late January. The night his crew finished the final inspection, Eamon sent her a text that said, "All clear, fully certified, shouldn't give you any trouble for at least 20 years. Then, after a pause, "How's Willa?" She answered the second question first. She told her therapist a joke last week, a bad one, about a duck. Then, "Thank you for the elevator and for everything that came before it." He wrote back, "The duck joke sounds promising. Kids with good bad joke energy tend to turn out okay." She was sitting in her office on the 32nd floor when she read it, and she laughed again. The real kind, the kind that had been missing from that office for longer than she'd realized. She thought about calling him. She didn't that night. She did, eventually. And when she told Willa that Eamon and Sorcha were coming for dinner on a Saturday in February, a careful, ordinary, deliberately undramatic dinner, Willa had looked up from her sketch pad, thought about it for a moment with the focused seriousness she brought to everything, and said, "Sorcha should bring Button." Constance said, "I'll ask." She texted Eamon, Willa's suggestion, "Sorcha should bring the fitting." He answered in under a minute. Sorcha has been sleeping with it in her tea tin for 2 months. She'll be thrilled. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon with snow on their boots and a grocery bag Eamon had packed himself. Groceries he'd bought to contribute to dinner without being asked, which Constance noticed and said nothing about. Sorcha was 6 and had her father's eyes and her own particular gravity, the kind some children have that makes you feel you're in the presence of someone who has already decided several things about the world. She walked into the kitchen, found Willa at the table with her sketch pad, sat down across from her without being introduced, and put the tea tin on the table between them. The two girls looked at each other. Then Sorcha opened the tin, then Willa looked inside. Then Willa said, "Button," and Sorcha said, "I know." And neither of them said anything for a while after that, which was, as anyone who knew either of them would understand, the very best kind of conversation.